The car was already waiting outside when Camilla realized this wasn't another palace warning. It wasn't a conversation. It wasn't a request. Someone had made a decision. Her personal staff had been told to prepare for an immediate move. Access inside the residence was being quietly restricted, but the name behind the decision was the one nobody around her wanted to say out loud: William. But here's the part that changes everything. In this dramatized scenario, William didn't suddenly wake up furious with Camilla. Something had happened inside the royal household hours earlier. Something serious enough that one senior aide supposedly looked at the instruction, read it twice, then asked the question everyone else was thinking. Does the king know? The answer was not reassuring, because Charles wasn't the person giving the order. Imagine the scene. Early morning. The palace corridors are almost silent. Security staff are changing shifts. Phones are beginning to ring. Aides are arriving with folders tucked under their arms. Then one message lands. Access arrangements concerning the Queen are being reviewed. Not next month. Not after a family discussion. Immediately. Now, that wording sounds harmless, almost bureaucratic. But people inside royal households understand something outsiders often miss. When access changes, power has already changed first. And Camilla reportedly understood that before almost anyone else did. Because the residence wasn't really the issue. The issue was who now believed they had the authority to tell her she could no longer use it. And that leads directly to William. For years, the tension around William and Camilla has been portrayed publicly through careful smiles, joint appearances, ceremonies, and those perfectly controlled royal moments where nobody says one unnecessary word. But families aren't photographs. Behind closed doors, history doesn't disappear because somebody puts on a morning coat. William grew up knowing exactly what Camilla represented in the story of his parents. Charles built an entirely different relationship with her. Two men, two memories. One crown moving slowly from one generation toward the next. But until this moment, those two worlds had been able to coexist. Barely. Then something changed. In our dramatized version of events, it started with a request involving rooms inside the residence. Camilla's household supposedly wanted greater control over certain private spaces, staffing arrangements, and future access. Nothing explosive on paper. That's what made it dangerous, because one of those spaces reportedly overlapped with an area William believed should remain under direct crown control. The disagreement went upstairs. Camilla's side expected Charles to settle it, but Charles didn't, and that silence created the opening William needed. Wait, because William still couldn't simply throw open a door, point outside, and tell the Queen to leave. Royal households don't work like that. Titles matter. Property matters. Who controls funding matters. Who controls the household matters even more. So William didn't attack the title. He attacked the arrangement. That distinction is everything. The message reaching Camilla's staff was reportedly narrow. Temporary relocation. Administrative review. Security reassessment. 3 phrases that sound almost boring. Until you realize what they actually mean when attached to a royal residence. Pack, move, wait for permission to come back. Camilla was furious. Not loudly. That would have been easier. People who knew how to read the room supposedly noticed something much colder. She started asking names. Who authorized it? Who had approved the security change? Who had spoken to William? Who had spoken to Charles? But there was one question she apparently kept coming back to. Where was Anne? Because Camilla could understand William acting emotionally. What she feared was William acting with support. And Anne's silence was becoming impossible to ignore. Picture that for a second. Camilla has spent years beside the king. She has stood on balconies, sat in state carriages, received the crown at Westminster Abbey. Then one morning, she is allegedly discovering that a decision affecting where she can stay may have moved through the royal machine without her being able to stop it. But William wasn't finished. A second instruction arrived. Personal belongings could remain temporarily. Household documents could not. That was when the mood reportedly changed. Because suddenly this wasn't about bedrooms. It was about paperwork. And everybody knew it. Royal residences contain more than furniture and family photographs. They contain correspondence, schedules, private briefing material, household records, access logs, administrative documents nobody outside the institution ever sees. So why would William care what paperwork left the building? That was the question Camilla's team allegedly started asking. And the answer was worse than they expected. Because a review had apparently begun before the relocation order, meaning William may not have reacted to Camilla. He may have been waiting for her. Now go back 48 hours. A private disagreement had reportedly erupted over future household arrangements, not who would become monarch. Everybody knows that answer. William. But what happens around the monarch can be just as important as the monarch himself. Residences, staff, security, patronages, private secretaries, family access. Who remains close enough to influence the center of power after Charles is no longer there? That question has never been comfortable. Because Camilla's position is extraordinary. Her status comes through Charles. William's future authority does not. The second William becomes king, the entire structure around the monarchy changes. New household, new priorities, new loyalties, new access, which means people whose influence currently travels through Charles suddenly face a terrifying question. What survives Charles? And what disappears with him? Camilla allegedly wanted clarity. William apparently wasn't prepared to give it. Then somebody pushed too far. A request was made to formalize certain arrangements concerning the residence. That request reportedly landed on William's desk. He refused. But instead of letting the matter die, another attempt allegedly followed through different channels. That was the mistake, because William no longer saw it as a request. He saw it as an attempt to create a permanent arrangement before he could stop it. You see where this is going. Camilla may have believed she was protecting her future. William may have believed she was limiting his. Same piece of paper, completely different war. Then came the meeting. Small room, no photographers, no ceremonial smiles. William arrived with advisors. Camilla expected Charles. Charles didn't attend. That alone should have told her how badly things had shifted. Nobody outside that fictional room can know exactly what would have been said, so forget the dramatic fake palace quotes. Look at the result. Within hours, arrangements were changing. Staff were being reassigned. Security personnel had new instructions. Access was being narrowed. But one person had still said almost nothing. Charles. That silence was becoming louder than the dispute itself. Was he backing William? Was he too weakened politically inside his own household to reverse him? Or had Charles discovered something in those documents that made him step aside? Because William's next move suggests this was bigger than a family argument. He asked for a complete review, not just of the residence, of arrangements attached to it, staffing, funding, access privileges, long-term commitments, anything that could survive from one reign into another. And if you think that sounds like William preparing for the future, you're already seeing what Camilla reportedly saw. This wasn't punishment. It was transition. That is much colder. Halfway through this story, if you follow the royal power struggles nobody notices until they explode, subscribe, because the next part is where an embarrassing household dispute turns into something Charles could no longer ignore. Camilla made her move. She went directly to him. Not through staff, not through advisors. Charles. And people expecting the king to immediately reverse William's decision would have been stunned. He didn't. At least, not immediately. Instead, Charles reportedly wanted to know exactly what had triggered the review. That question changed the room. because if Charles already believed William had simply overreacted, there would be nothing to investigate. You reverse it. You move on. But Charles asked for the papers. Now Camilla had a problem. The same documents she wanted returned to her household were apparently the documents William wanted held. Nobody was shouting. Nobody needed to. The papers were doing all the damage. One proposal allegedly concerned guaranteed future accommodation. Another dealt with continuing staff support. Then there were references to members of Camilla's wider family being able to use certain spaces under defined circumstances. Nothing necessarily improper on its face, but William saw the danger immediately. Because temporary arrangements have a strange habit of becoming traditions inside institutions built on tradition. One concession. Then precedent. Then expectation. Then, suddenly, a future king finds himself being told he cannot change something because his father already allowed it. That was William's nightmare. Camilla's nightmare was the exact opposite. She feared William could erase everything the moment Charles was gone. And suddenly you can understand why neither side was willing to blink. But then Anne entered the picture. Not dramatically. That's what made it worse. She simply asked to see the documents. Camilla reportedly didn't want her involved. William did. Why? Because Anne has one thing neither William nor Camilla can manufacture. Memory. Anne remembers Elizabeth's household. She remembers what was treated as personal, what belonged to the sovereign, what disappeared when one reign ended, what continued, and most importantly, what her mother never intended to become hereditary privilege for spouses or extended family. Anne allegedly examined the arrangement, said very little, then pointed to one section. That section concerned post-reign access. Everyone stopped. Because there it was, the future, not Charles's, William's. Camilla was trying to secure stability. William believed someone was writing obligations into his reign before his reign had even started. Now ask yourself something. If Charles believed Camilla was completely right, why hadn't he signed it already? Exactly. The absence of his signature became the most important thing on the page. William noticed. Anne noticed. Camilla definitely noticed, which is why she changed tactics. Forget permanent rights. Forget future guarantees. Could she at least remain in the residence while the review continued? A reasonable request. Except William said no. That was the drastic action. In this scenario, William believed leaving Camilla inside while documents, access permissions, and household arrangements were being reviewed defeated the entire purpose of the review. So the temporary relocation remained. That's when the car was called. Now we're back where we started. Bags being prepared, aides moving quickly. Camilla standing inside a residence where, only hours earlier, nobody imagined anyone could tell her to leave. But the humiliation wasn't the car outside. It was what happened at the door. Her usual security access no longer worked in exactly the same way. Not canceled, modified, a tiny administrative change. Almost invisible. Yet there are few things more brutal than discovering your status through a locked door. Camilla's face supposedly changed because she understood. William hadn't stripped a title. He hadn't needed to. He had separated the title from the machinery around it. That is how royal power actually moves. Quietly. A signature. A staff instruction. A security clearance. A room you could enter yesterday but need permission to enter today. Then Charles finally acted, but not against William. He called him in. Father and son. No Anne. No Camilla. No advisors for part of the conversation. And this is where everyone expected the explosion. Charles had spent decades defending his relationship with Camilla. He endured public hostility for her. He rebuilt her public standing. He watched her become queen. Surely this was the line. Surely Charles would tell William he had gone too far. But when the meeting ended, nothing changed. Camilla remained out. Think about what that means. Charles may not have liked William's method. He may even have hated it. But he apparently could not dismiss the concern behind it. And that created a far more dangerous question. What had William shown him? The answer emerged indirectly. The disputed arrangement apparently wasn't illegal. That would have made things simple. It was worse. It was ambiguous. Written carefully enough that one side could describe it as ordinary household planning, while another could interpret it as a future entitlement. Exactly the sort of wording royal institutions hate. Because ambiguity becomes conflict. Conflict becomes precedent. Precedent becomes constitutional headache. William wanted it dead before anyone could ever argue it had become established practice. But Camilla wasn't surrendering. Her advisors reportedly began assembling another file, not about the residence, about promises, commitments Charles had made privately over the years, assurances, understandings. Things never designed to survive a courtroom, but powerful enough to destroy a family. And one of those alleged assurances directly contradicted William's plan. Charles had apparently promised Camilla she would never be made to feel disposable after his reign. There it was, the emotional grenade. William could argue about institutions. Camilla could argue that his father had given his word. Now what? If William backed down, Camilla's arrangements could follow him into his own reign. If he refused, he risked looking like the son dismantling his father's promises before his father was even gone. But the biggest surprise came from Camilla herself. She stopped fighting the temporary move, completely. Staff were stunned. William's team became suspicious immediately. Because Camilla doesn't survive decades of royal hostility by suddenly giving up when the pressure gets uncomfortable. She had seen something. Or understood something. The next morning, one of her aides requested clarification concerning another property. Not the residence William had just removed her from. Another royal home. One Charles could potentially place at Camilla's disposal under a completely different arrangement. William had closed one door. Camilla was looking for another, and Charles could open it. That threatened to blow the entire dispute apart. William responded within hours. Any new arrangement involving long-term occupancy, staffing, or crown resources would also fall under review. That was unprecedentedly aggressive in family terms. He wasn't chasing a house anymore. He was trying to make sure no last-minute arrangement could outrun the transition. Camilla reportedly read the message, put it down, then smiled. Why smile? Because William had just revealed his fear. Time. He was worried Charles might act before William's future authority became absolute, meaning Camilla still had leverage. The king. Charles now had a choice nobody around him could make painless. Protect Camilla and risk binding William. Support William and break the promise Camilla believed Charles had made. Do nothing and watch the two people closest to the future of the monarchy tear the household in half. Then, Anne apparently gave Charles the sentence that ended the debate. Not a dramatic insult, not a threat, a principle. A monarch can make personal promises, but he cannot make his successor live by all of them. Charles reportedly went quiet, because that was the answer. Not William winning, not Camilla losing. Something much colder. There are promises even a king cannot guarantee. By evening, Camilla's move became official inside the household. Temporary, pending review, no public announcement, no grand eviction, just vehicles crossing a gated entrance while curtains remained closed. William had gotten what he wanted, or so everyone thought, because the final file was still on Charles's desk, the one containing Camilla's private assurances. Charles opened it alone. Inside was a handwritten note. His handwriting, years old, short, personal, a promise about her future. Charles stared at it for a long time. Then, instead of sending it back to Camilla, he placed it inside the red dispatch box. For William, that is the image that matters. Not Camilla leaving, not the locked door, not the argument. An aging king taking a promise he once made to his wife and quietly handing it to the son, who may one day have to decide whether that promise survives him. Because the real question was never whether William could order Camilla out of one residence. It was whether William was already deciding which parts of Charles's world would be allowed into his. And somewhere behind another set of royal gates, Camilla knew exactly what that meant. The residence could be returned. The staff could come back. Even the doors could reopen. But once William had proven he was prepared to close them, she would never look at those doors the same way again. If you think William was protecting his future reign, say so below. But if you think he crossed a line Charles should never have allowed him to cross, tell me that too. Because one day those gates will close behind Charles. And when they reopen, William will have the keys.